It starts quietly, not with chaos, not with noise, but with a simple notification on your phone, the kind you almost ignore at first, except this one feels different, heavier, official, permanent, a message that doesn't ask for permission before changing your life. A draft notice that arrives without warning, without a countdown, without any explanation. Just one line that pulls you out of your normal routine and into something much bigger than you. Something global, something irreversible. Because when World War III begins, it doesn't announce itself with sirens or soldiers at your door. It arrives through systems, screens, and silent decisions made far above your head. And suddenly the only question that matters is what happens if you don't show up. Because many people assume ignoring the draft means disappearing quietly, slipping through the cracks, being forgotten by a system that's too busy to care. But modern war doesn't work that way anymore. Today, everything is connected. Records are digital, identities are tracked, and silence is never invisible. Choosing not to respond doesn't freeze time. It starts it moving faster. Your status changes, your options narrow, and life begins to feel smaller without anything visibly dramatic happening. No movie scenes, no loud confrontations, just subtle pressure building day by day. Opportunities closing, questions following you everywhere, and the uncomfortable realization that doing nothing was still a choice with consequences. Because this isn't fiction and it isn't a rumor. It's how large systems react when individuals stop responding. And whether you agree with the draft or not, whether you feel ready or terrified, the reality is that ignoring it doesn't stop the process. It only changes how it reaches you, slowly, quietly, and personally. And that's the part no one talks about. Not the battlefield, not the headlines. But the moment you look at your phone, reread the message, and understand that from this point forward, every decision you make will shape the life you're about to live. For decades, most people believed the draft was a relic of history, something buried in textbooks, something their grandparents spoke about in quiet moments, tied to black and white footage and fading memories from another era, a policy that felt distant, outdated, and impossible to imagine returning. But global war has a way of rewriting assumptions, and when a conflict grows beyond borders and alliances begin to fracture, everything changes. Because when World War III begins, volunteer forces are no longer enough to sustain expanding operations. Pressure builds quietly at first, then rapidly, as governments face rising demands, widening fronts, and an international system under strain. Emergency powers are activated, policies once unthinkable are reconsidered, and mandatory conscription quietly returns, not with parades or speeches, but through systems people already live inside. Notifications delivered through emails, text messages, official apps, and sealed letters. Arriving without warning, without drama, without explanation, just clear instructions and a deadline, sometimes days away, sometimes measured in hours, telling ordinary civilians to report to assigned centers, transforming everyday routines into moments of personal reckoning. Because there is no ceremony to prepare you for it, no crowd to share the weight of the decision, just a document, a date, and the understanding that history has suddenly stepped into your life. And in that moment, millions of people across different countries are faced with a choice they never believed they would have to make. A choice between compliance and resistance, between certainty and consequence, between stepping forward into an unknown future shaped by global forces far beyond individual control, or stepping away and living with what follows. Because when systems shift and nations mobilize, the draft does not feel like a headline anymore. It feels personal, immediate, and unavoidable. Reducing a complex geopolitical crisis into a single, silent question that lingers long after the notification fades from the screen. Do you show up, or do you not? At first, most people freeze, because the message doesn't arrive with sirens or explosions. It arrives quietly, on a screen you check every day, and for a moment your brain refuses to accept it. So you read it again and again, hoping there's been some kind of mistake, hoping it's meant for someone else, telling yourself that it won't really be enforced, that there must be an exemption, that this situation will calm down like so many others before it. And across the world people react in different ways. Some panic immediately as the weight of uncertainty hits them all at once. Some deny it and try to carry on as if nothing has changed. And some begin planning right away, organizing their lives with careful precision. But there are also those who make a serious decision, a quiet one, made in the privacy of their own thoughts, where they convince themselves that staying silent is the safest option, that not responding will somehow buy time, that stepping back from public view will make the problem fade. Because in the past that approach sometimes worked, when systems were slower, when information moved at a human pace. But the world no longer works that way. And while the streets may still look familiar and daily life may appear unchanged on the surface, behind the scenes everything is connected, monitored, logged, and processed. Governments operate through vast networks of data. Decisions ripple outward instantly, and silence is no longer invisible, because in a modern geopolitical world shaped by global crises and constant information flow, every choice leaves a trace, every delay is noticed, and every individual reaction becomes part of a much larger system that keeps moving forward, regardless of whether you are ready or not. Missing your reporting date doesn't make the situation disappear, it quietly makes it heavier. What felt like a moment of delay becomes a permanent mark because the system does not forget. The first response is not dramatic or loud. It's administrative, calm, and precise. Somewhere in a government database, your status changes, and that single update ripples outward. You are no longer just a civilian who didn't respond in time. You are now recorded as non-compliant. That label activates automated processes across multiple departments that don't need opinions or emotions to function. Your national identification is flagged inside digital systems designed to share information seamlessly. Your passport status shifts, sometimes without warning, turning future travel into a question mark instead of a certainty. Financial institutions may quietly restrict or monitor activity, not as punishment, but as procedure. Your name appears on internal lists that don't announce themselves, but shape outcomes anyway. When you attempt to move between regions or cross borders, systems pause, request reviews, and delay decisions. When you apply for employment, background checks don't fail loudly. They simply return incomplete, unresolved, or under review. Doors don't slam shut, they stop opening. What makes this process unsettling is its silence. There are no confrontations, no dramatic chases, no visible force. Life continues around you at normal speed, while your options slowly narrow behind the scenes. You walk through familiar streets, sit in familiar rooms, and use the same devices, but the context has shifted. Every official interaction now carries an invisible asterisk. You aren't hiding from the system, you are fully visible inside it. And yet, nothing seems to happen all at once. Days pass, weeks stretch on. You wait for a message, a resolution, a reversal that never arrives. The tension doesn't come from action, but from stillness, from knowing that something has already been decided somewhere you cannot access. This is how modern authority works, not through spectacle, but through records, statuses, and quiet limitations. And in that waiting space, where nothing explodes and nothing ends, you realize the truth. Not showing up wasn't an escape. It was the beginning of a slower, quieter consequence. When a nation enters wartime, the rules of ordinary life quietly disappear, and draft evasion stops being seen as a personal choice and starts being treated as a serious legal violation, one that governments are prepared to punish without hesitation. The exact penalties may differ from country to country, shaped by their laws and traditions, but during a global conflict those differences shrink and consequences grow harsher across the board. Heavy financial penalties can be imposed, fines large enough to follow a person for years, stripping away stability and future opportunities. Prison sentences become a real possibility, not symbolic, not temporary, but long enough to permanently alter the course of a life. In some systems, avoiding service does not lead to freedom at all, but instead results in forced military service under even stricter conditions, where punishment replaces choice and control replaces consent. Beyond immediate penalties, there is the lasting damage of a permanent criminal record, a mark that does not fade when the war ends, affecting employment, travel, and social standing long after the headlines move on. Under extreme wartime laws, draft evasion can be elevated to a national security offense, placing the individual in the same legal category as those accused of undermining the state itself. At that point, the process accelerates. Trials are fast-tracked, appeals are limited or denied, and decisions are made behind closed doors with speed prioritized over sympathy. There are no dramatic courtroom moments, no cheering crowds, and no public support waiting outside. Society, focused on survival and victory, rarely pauses to question these outcomes. And unlike the movies, where defiance is celebrated and resistance is rewarded, the reality is quieter and colder. Paperwork moves forward, decisions are finalized, and the system processes the individual without emotion, without spectacle, and without delay. Even if no one comes to your door and no official handcuffs ever click shut, life does not return to normal, because from that moment onward, it begins to quietly shrink around you. Conversations become shorter, invitations stop arriving, familiar names disappear from your phone without explanation, not because people hate you, but because distance feels safer than association in a world shaped by global tension and political fear, and slowly you realize that absence can be louder than confrontation. Opportunities fade in the same way. Applications vanish into silence. Interviews never happen. Doors that once opened easily now remain closed without comment, as institutions become cautious, automated, and risk-averse during times of international instability. At the same time, the digital world you once moved through freely begins to feel different, heavier, more watchful, as online spaces shift from places of expression into systems of observation, where activity is categorized, patterns are noted, and information is endlessly processed. Every post, every message, every digital trace becomes part of a larger picture that no single person controls, turning your online presence into something fragile rather than empowering. Social platforms feel colder, communication feels restrained, and even silence begins to carry meaning. Messages are no longer just words, they are data points. Locations are no longer just places, they are coordinates. In an era defined by modern conflict and geopolitical uncertainty, technology does not need villains or heroes. It simply records, remembers, and reacts. And this is the quiet truth of modern war. It does not only exist on borders or battlefields, but in systems, networks, and everyday routines, where visibility replaces pursuit and access replaces force. Over time, familiar services, familiar spaces, and familiar freedoms feel distant, not because they were taken in a single dramatic moment, but because they slowly become unreachable. The world you once moved through without thinking does not disappear overnight. It fades, step by step, until one day you realize that nothing is technically forbidden, yet everything feels just out of reach, and the silence around you becomes the clearest signal of all. When people ask whether it is possible to legally avoid the draft, the honest answer is yes, but only barely, and only for a very small number of people. On paper, many governments claim to offer lawful alternatives, systems that exist to protect those who truly cannot serve, such as medical exemptions for serious physical conditions, psychological evaluations for mental health concerns, essential civilian roles that keep nations functioning during crisis, or conscientious objector status for those whose moral beliefs fundamentally oppose military service. These pathways sound reassuring, even humane, but the reality during a global conflict like World War III is very different. As war expands and pressure intensifies, these systems become overwhelmed almost immediately, buried under paperwork, shortages of staff, and constant political urgency. Every application is treated with suspicion, every claim examined again and again, because governments know that fear pushes people to look for exits, and not all of them are honest. Medical records are reviewed aggressively, psychological assessments are repeated, civilian roles are narrowly defined, and moral objections are questioned until only the most clear-cut cases remain. Approval becomes rare, not because laws disappear, but because the standard for acceptance rises higher than most people expect. Scrutiny is relentless, quiet, and procedural, but no less intense, and mistakes, or exaggerations, carry serious consequences. False claims don't simply fail. They follow you, complicating your situation rather than solving it, turning what might have been a legal review into a long-term problem. Many discover too late that trying to manipulate the system often leads to stricter oversight, lost trust, and fewer options than before. In a world at war, legality does not disappear, but it hardens. narrowing into something cold and exact, where every decision is measured against national survival. And while a few do find legitimate paths forward, most learn that avoiding the draft legally is not about cleverness or loopholes. It is about circumstances you cannot easily create, cannot fake, and cannot undo once examined. Because when everything is under strain, the system does not bend easily, and when it does, it bends only for reasons it considers unavoidable, never for convenience, and never without cost. Most people never stop to consider this part, because it's uncomfortable and quietly unsettling. But here is the truth that rarely gets spoken aloud. Ignoring a military draft does not place you outside the reach of war. It simply changes the way war enters your life, because conflict is no longer limited to borders, uniforms, or distant front lines. It moves through systems, records, decisions, and daily routines. And when you turn away from it, the pressure does not disappear, it just shifts. Replacing structure with uncertainty, preparation with constant anxiety, and visible danger with invisible weight, where instead of a uniform you carry a permanent record, instead of training you carry unanswered questions, and instead of facing risk in one defined place, you feel it everywhere at once, in paperwork, in silence, in the way every official process feels heavier than before. And slowly your world becomes smaller, not because enemies are surrounding you, but because the system you live inside begins to close in, quietly, legally, and without urgency, until you find yourself moving through ordinary days with extraordinary awareness, always checking what might follow, not from fear of an external threat, but from the understanding that modern conflict no longer announces itself with noise. It arrives through institutions, decisions, and consequences, and once it does, there is no simple way to step completely outside of it. The world changes silently, often without warning, and when global conflict rises, it doesn't ask if you're ready. Life goes on around you, yet everything you once planned feels fragile, inconsequential, as invisible forces rearrange the rules of existence. Official notices appear quietly, yet carry a weight that stretches far beyond the moment, turning decisions into consequences that last long after the world has moved on. When that notice arrives, hesitation is itself a choice, a subtle but powerful act, because inaction carries its own repercussions. The questions we ask ourselves then are no longer about survival in the traditional sense, nor about the battlefield we imagined in old stories, but about surviving the ripple of effects that touch every corner of life. The career left behind, the relationships strained, the freedoms quietly eroded, and the silent gaze of a society that notices absence. It is a landscape not of chaos or explosion, but of quiet tension, where every decision reverberates through unseen systems, where what you don't do shapes the reality around you. And so, the real question isn't about courage in combat, but about endurance in a world that keeps moving, a world where every choice, or lack thereof, defines the life that comes after, and asks whether you can carry the weight of all that follows, unseen, unspoken, yet profoundly permanent. It is in that quiet reflection, in the stillness between notice and action, that we confront the truth. Survival is never just physical. It is a measure of resilience, foresight, and the ability to navigate the invisible currents that guide our lives when the familiar rules no longer apply.